it's somewhat ideological that like these communities are going to be very organic. They're going to be sort of self-organizing. They're going to govern themselves. There's going to be these sort of intrinsic contributions, right? And in China, developer communities don't look like that, right? If you were building developer archetypes, they look different than they are in the West, right? They're more pragmatic. They're not ideological.
Layer 1 is a podcast and community dedicated to helping you master all things crypto. We'll be bringing you the best interviews with project executives, technical analysis for trading of the most popular cryptocurrencies, and insight into what's actually happening behind the scenes.
As you join us each episode, you're going to hear about tokens, fundraisers, investments, and even crypto conspiracies. But please remember that nothing we say should be considered financial or legal advice.
Come join us on this journey and welcome to Layer 1.
Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we are back with another episode of the Layer 1 podcast. It's been a little bit since I think it was me and you, Q, hosting these. So as always, good to be back. And as always, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good, man. I'm surprised you didn't say good morning, good evening, good night. You don't like my intro, apparently.
That's your thing. I don't want to steal it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a great episode in front of us. It is a great Thursday that we're having. Everybody out there that's listening and following along with Layer 1, we appreciate you guys doing so. We have a great episode today. We're going to talk everything Conflux with Eden Dhaliwal. He is the global managing director at Conflux. So without further ado, we're going to unveil him here. Eden, how are you doing today?
Good. How you guys? You mentioned a nice sunny day over there. It's a nice sunny day in Toronto for once as well.
Yeah, definitely. Me and Mike made a couple trips to Toronto within the last couple of years. And we love the city. So hopefully we get into some Toronto talk. But before then, we're going to talk about your background, Eden.
Cool.
Your background, maybe before crypto, before tech, even. Just take us through the whole thing. We want to hear it all.
Sure. So I spent most of my career in early stage venture development, both as an incubator and as an investor. And I encountered blockchain and cryptocurrency in about 2014. I was actually living in Berlin at the time. And my neighbor asked me to look after his Airbnb at the time, fairly often enough that it got me into crypto. Let's put it that way. He was paying me with Bitcoin. And I also ran into, I'm actually originally from Winnipeg, the prairies, the real sort of cold part of Canada. And in Berlin, there's one of the leaders of that ecosystem, Trent McConaughey. I ended up connecting with him. We were both sort of prairie boys. He's from Saskatchewan. I'm from Manitoba. And he started telling me some of the work that he was doing around at that time, a project called Ascribe. And I started getting pulled into the whole blockchain whirlwind. And so since then, it took me a couple of years to actually continually sort of go to community events, work with people. I started investing more and more. Before I knew it, I felt very compelled to find some sort of sandbox to work with this technology. And I was looking around for a great opportunity to kind of experiment, and I ended up finding that opportunity with the Canadian Copyright Licensing Agency. So sounds really boring, but actually was pretty exciting. So this agency actually represents media and publishing in Canada, and was kind of formed in the 80s. In response to the photocopier. So the photocopier back in the 80s was sort of the big bad sort of threatening technology. And so they created this agency as a response to this looming technology that they thought was going to be a threat to their business models. And the agency was effectively a law firm for years and years and years enforcing copyright. And so, obviously, the internet was born in the 90s, or at least delivered to everybody in the 90s. And obviously the internet has changed media and publishing has really killed a lot of the business models. The industry as a whole never really adapted, and they basically over time were finding this sort of copyright, this legal strategy was no longer working. The courts are not even enforcing copyright. In fact, sort of society's values have changed over time, where information should be democratized, and if there's sort of a good reason, then copyright doesn't necessarily need to be enforced. And so basically this strategy has been undermined for years, and they've never really adapted their business models. And so they decided that they wanted to try to pursue a new strategy, an innovation strategy. And so when I started talking with them, I told them, well, look, I think I got a half solution, which is a blockchain strategy. And so this blockchain strategy is going to allow you to kind of create the business models of tomorrow, create the standards of tomorrow, right? And so we can examine how we can apply blockchain to IP, to creative rights. And I ended up taking this job, which was back here in Toronto. So I ended up coming back to Toronto. And while I was in Berlin, I had actually been talking to and running into Jamie Burke, who's the CEO of Outlier Ventures. And obviously one of the figures over time that I had conversations with and learned from. He actually, I ran into him in Toronto. He was here sort of pitching Outlier Ventures, pitching some of the portfolio. And I started to show him some of the work we were doing in this innovation lab. And at that time, we're talking, 2000, like early 2017, like very early 2017. Just before sort of the big ICO boom, let's put it that way. I started showing some of the work that I was doing around token models and some of the analysis and computational work. And, before I knew it, I was a part of Outlier in a matter of a few months. So that stint at the Canadian Copyright License Agency was only, a few months, but actually pretty valuable sandbox for me to kind of play around with. And I was able to take a lot of those learnings to Outlier, where my role was essentially to build a crypto economics practice. And so, we built some methodologies around how to design and build crypto economies, token economies. We built some analytical models in assessing network value. And we built a strong team and resources around that practice, including a partnership with Imperial College London and their Center of Blockchain and Cryptocurrency Research. And so it was through this work that I ended up kind of forging and building like a big network with academia. And this work was really important because what we were trying to do, aside from, assess token models for, investment due diligence, was to actually figure out how we can add value to our portfolio projects. How can we help them design, build better crypto economies? And probably even more important, how do we help them go to market, right? Like, what is the go-to-market strategy? And so this was the type of stuff, type of conversations I'd be having with academia, not just at Imperial College, but also, with University of Toronto. Over time, I just started to use my own backyard out of convenience and encountered a lot of super smart people, including the founder of Conflux, one of the founders of Conflux, Professor Fan Long.
Got it. But before we move on, because we do want to talk Conflux, that was a great breakdown, and me and Mike have a few questions on Outlier itself. I think you kind of brought us up to that point. And by the way, great entrance into crypto if you got it in 2017. Phenomenal timing. But as far as Outlier's thesis, and I know in our pre-episode kind of research that we do, the idea of convergence came up a couple times in a couple presentations that you were talking about. So I'm wondering if you still kind of follow this thesis. What was kind of the investment thesis at Outlier Ventures? And I'm sure Mike has a couple more questions as far as it comes to Outlier.
Sure. So at Outlier, we developed what was called the Convergence thesis. And this thesis is basically the idea that there are great opportunities in building Web3 infrastructure that will facilitate decentralized data economies that can be built at the intersections of blockchains and other emerging tech. So the emerging tech being IoT, edge computing, machine learning, AI, AR, VR. And, for the past 3 years or so, that's been our investment thesis. And what we've been concentrating on more recently is building up our Basecamp Accelerator program. And this accelerator program is also looking for convergence opportunities, but it's also now sort of expanding to this idea of what are Web 2.5 business models, right? Like, how do we take that half step towards, Web3 sustainability? And so we've been, looking at everything from, token-based opportunities to your conventional equity-based investments with regards to Basecamp.
Gotcha. Was Outlier a traditional venture firm that kind of moved into crypto, or was it started as a crypto venture firm primarily?
So Outlier's has been a pretty unconventional firm. Originally, so first of all, it was founded, I think it could be 2015, maybe a couple of years before I got there. Jamie and Aaron are the founders, Aaron Van Amers out of Amsterdam. And I think originally it was kind of more of an angel network that was making some strategic investments, but also incubating. Now, over time, there were some key investments that were, that actually worked out really well for us. For example, at least at the time, IOTA was a very successful investment way back when. And so we kept that business model of investment and incubation for a very long time. In fact, we had been focusing primarily on, I would say, at one point on incubation, especially while I was there. And we are not a conventional sort of GP LP organization. It's been a partnership in which you could almost say angel investors have put in their own capital. And I'm still a member of Outlier. I'm still a mentor to Basecamp. I'm a executive advisor to our team, and still heavily involved. So we are, with regards to Basecamp, scaling Basecamp. We actually have a virtual accelerator that we're launching very soon. So with regards to Outlier, it's sort of adapting with the times, and part of it has been, I think, part of the ability for us to adapt has actually been you can attribute that to us not having been a GP LP structure. Actually, it just made it easier to kind of pivot.
Right. Yeah, it makes a ton of sense, and it's interesting. You started in the venture model, and now obviously are working for Conflux, which we're going to get to here in a second. But finally, on the Outlier front, how does Outlier kind of look at a lot of the volatility that you see within crypto, right? You mentioned IOTA was a really successful investment, but under a venture model, assuming the time frame is multi-year, 3, 5, 7, 10 years, you could see the price of IOTA or another investment go, up 5, 10, 100x, and then down 90% from there. So how do you think Outlier thinks about this volatility and maybe some of the other kind of major venture folks in the crypto space? To me, that is seemingly very difficult to deal with.
It is very difficult. So we're not a crypto hedge group. So we're not a trading group. We have a very long view, as you would imagine. Again, I think our structure enables us not to be sort of married to selling off assets, prematurely, you could say. So we have the ability to be long investors because our investor group is, you could say, I don't want to say necessarily long only, but we are patient investors. We believe in this space. We also believe that this space is going to evolve, and when it does, it's going to be quite exponential. So we're not short-termists. I think we're also all very educated, informed investors. We understand not just the volatility in the market, but also you could say the regulatory sort of issues that are involved. We are fairly active in understanding what the investments are, like exactly that we're spending our time on, and as a result, I think I think uniquely are well aligned in being a long, I don't want to say long only, but long focused investor group.
Gotcha. Well, that was an absolutely fantastic kind of breakdown of your background, and we've kind of made it up to Conflux, and I appreciate everything you just kind of laid out there. It is tough to be a value investor sometimes in today's markets. Even the traditional markets seem to be kind of uncorrelated from any sort of value, but we've made it to Conflux. So I know you said in your time at Outlier was the time that you met people from Conflux. So can you take us through that story and then why you decided to make the jump into that protocol?
Sure. So as I mentioned, part of the building this crypto economics practice for Outlier really necessitated sort of reaching out and connecting with super smart people. And like I said, we were working very closely with Imperial College London, but I had built this academic base that was fairly global, and at one point it dawned on me that I actually haven't made enough connections locally at the University of Toronto, and I was traveling around all over the place connecting with people, but I actually should tap into this great university, one of the top in the world, and so I ran into some super smart people. Andreas Park, who's actually an economist, one of the leaders of FinHub, a fintech hub at Rotman School of Management. Andreas Veneris, who's sort of a thought leader, an ecosystem leader, professor in computer science at the University of Toronto, and Fawn Long, as I mentioned, one of the founders. And so all three of these folks are actually members of Conflux. And I had conversations throughout 2019 with Fawn, talking about what does go-to-market look like for a network, right? And some of it was fascinating. In the sense that we, as sort of Western investors, Western, you could say ideologies, the way we think a network should roll out is often very much based around this sort of bottom-up, community-driven approach. And so, had some really interesting conversations about, the nuances of different sort of jurisdictions, different cultures, and how networks and global networks can and could be launched depending on where they're being launched from. So what I discovered over time was also the story of Conflux, which was super interesting. And so what I discovered was that, Conflux was born out of the labs of Tsinghua University, which is this sort of this Harvard MIT of China. They've created this breakthrough blockchain architecture that is high security and high TPS, over 6,000 transactions per second. The project is actually led by Turing Award winner, Dr. Andy Yao, and some other amazing computer scientists, like I said, from Tsinghua University and University of Toronto. And, I had actually flown out to Beijing and met the team there and was like super impressed. And also not just with the credibility of the team and the project, but also what I discovered was sort of the trust that had been built up by Conflux in the China market, right? And it's hard for us over here, I think, to really fully understand the dynamics and the relationships and the terrain in China. But Conflux in 2018 raised $35 million in the middle of the crypto winter. And, we worked very hard at working with regulators to be regulatory compliant. So this is a regulatory compliant raise that we did. And that earned us quite a bit of trust in the market and from the government. And, you could say the credibility of the team and the trustability in the market that we developed were very, I would say, significant factors in me understanding sort of the value and the traction that had already been created by this project. And maybe just to kind of a note on the investors. I mean, the investors that are behind this project, I think, are pretty well-established investors as well. That kind of gave credence to this project, at least for me. So Sequoia, Metastable, Baidu Ventures, Huobi. So some pretty prominent investors. And so there is a tremendous amount of, like I said, trust, credibility, will behind this project. That's what I discovered. And for me, having seen, I would say, probably a few hundred investments over the years and many launches, what I determined was that there's actually a faster or a shorter path to success here. Success in building an ecosystem and building a network that has value. And so what I saw was awesome team, a breakthrough technology that's very close to being ready. Our mainnet is actually in September. It's going to be sort of, like I mentioned, industrial grade in terms of security and scalability. What I saw was a massive market opportunity. Conflux, again, is the only regulatory compliant public permissionless blockchain in China. And then I also saw a very clear and accessible point of entry. And so Conflux, probably the last part of Conflux I think is important, is that Conflux is actually state endorsed. So the Shanghai state has endorsed and actually funded us. And this is aside from the raise that we did. And that's pretty significant. we are the only public permissionless blockchain in China with that can say that we're regulatory compliant, we're endorsed, and in fact we're actually have received funding from the Shanghai state government. And Shanghai state government is actually strategically probably the very best spot to be in China, it being the financial center.
Right. Yeah. Lots of potential money flow there. And, you can kind of relate it to like a New York in the US, or certainly a Toronto in Canada. There's a lot to unpack there, especially around China and kind of the benefits that Conflux has there. But, taking a step back and kind of looking at Conflux in relation to the broader crypto space, there's been a ton of new blockchains that have come out over the last 2 years, some super recently. Others have been kind of grinding away for a few years now. And it seems that we've gotten to a point where certainly Bitcoin has remained the top asset by market cap. ETH has remained number 2 there and has some big plans when it comes to scalability and whatnot, albeit with delays. And then there's kind of this mixture of your various pure proof of stake or delegated proof of stake. You've got some other hybrid models that maybe mix in a little bit of proof of work there. And then, you have Conflux joining the scene, as we definitely want to get into. But, for somebody that thinks about go-to-market and thinks about token economics, how do you differentiate yourself in such a, packed pool of brand new blockchains, all really trying to accomplish the same things, right? Grow the protocol and the cryptographic network quickly in order to build security and have something that's reliable and live, while also at the same time building out this sort of token ecosystem that you've talked about, where the goal is certainly to provide a technology that's useful for developers or users or other participants that might, be interested in using a token network, if you will. So how do you, based on your experience, kind of think about those things?
So I think a lot depends on the intrinsic value that a protocol generates. I mean, if you have a protocol that actually isn't sort of creating sort of differentiating value, then I think it's going to be very tough to begin with. But assuming that you have a protocol that actually has intrinsic value to offer to the market, generally what the problem is with most projects is that they've worked out all the crypto economics where supply side is figured out, right? They understand the stakeholders. All the crypto economic primitives have been sort of figured out, and you've got the inflation schedule modeled out. But all of this falls flat because, they haven't accounted for demand. They haven't really figured out how they're going to actually, sort of generate users, use cases, applications, etc. And so for us, there's 2 things that we've been thinking about. So the first thing kind of reminds me of a recent academic paper where they found the vast majority of transactions on Ripple, EOS, and Tezos didn't actually transfer any value. And so for us, we're really focused on not just putting transactions on the network, but transactions with actual value on the network. So that's an important distinction. And that's something that's important for us. The second thing is that crypto networks are not revenue generating, and therefore not revenue recurring, right? It's not that's not really sort of the right metric. And so what we're concentrating on is recurring transactions of value, right? And so strategically for us, government projects actually work out really well, because we're talking about recurring transactions over the long term. And so right now you can expect government based projects involving supply chain management, green energy traceability, data centers, and construction tracking in the short term on Conflux. And so what we're really trying to sort of establish is, what is LTV? What is the lifetime value of recurring transactions? And these are the two sort of fundamentals that we're using to kind of tackle how we're going to roll out our network. And this is our beachhead, right? This is our sort of China strategy. Not only are the government projects going to sort of help us build our ecosystem in terms of transactions on the network, but you know, there is a fair amount of regulation still to be overcome. And what this does for us is that this gives us the ability to provide proof points as to why you should use a open, public, permissionless network for other use cases. And, you know, we believe that's going to loosen up regulation for some really, really fantastic opportunities.
Gotcha. Yeah, it makes a ton of sense there. I think a lot of projects, especially those that have been around for a little while, are starting to see the value in some sort of enterprise or government solution that they can provide these folks who, especially in the case of governments, don't really often have the desire of building the technology from scratch themselves. It's a lot of time, it's a lot of effort. It's much easier to say go and in the case of Conflux, invest, right, and kind of own or at least have some sort of say in the protocol to some degree, or in the project to some degree that way. So Conflux in particular, understanding that there are a variety of different projects with this goal in China or in Canada or elsewhere, what makes Conflux the clear winner in your mind, be it from a technological standpoint or whatever the case may be?
Well, I think again, we're leading we're sort of the you could say the ambassador for public permissionless networks in China. Okay, because again, you know, we have a highly credible team. We have a breakthrough technology. We've gone through. We've been compliant, and we've built a really great relationship, an ongoing relationship with the government, regulators, and industry. And so, in China, there's a few things we could point to. One is, with our funding, we've actually established a research center in Shanghai. So this is going to be sort of ongoing R&D, exploring use cases, public use cases that could be used in industries that are, let's say, right now regulated, but perhaps will help us open up those doors. So we've got that sort of, you could say, FaceTime to do that. And so it's not a sandbox, but it's like a sandbox. The second thing is that along with that funding, we're launching actually in the next few weeks an incubation center in Shanghai as well, which is also going to provide opportunities for us to launch new use cases, dApps, hopefully some DeFi on our network. And one of the things I would kind of point out here is that, you know, we really do believe in bottom-up community building. Now, with all the talk that I've with all that I've mentioned around, you know, our government engagement, okay, we have a pretty huge developer community over there, and you know, what we're trying to do is actually converge a bottom-up ecosystem building with a top-down strategy that's going to loosen up regulation. And in China, there is actually less bureaucracy around loosening up regulation. Things can move very, very quickly there. And so we actually do expect things will move quicker than they would, you know, for example, with the SEC in the US. So we think, you know, the relationships we have, the community that we have in China, and then, you know, looking beyond China, because we're not a China-based network, right? We're a global network. What we want to do is we want to take this value pool that we're creating in China, and we want to decentralize it. Like we want to be able to demonstrate and show not to just the Chinese market, but the global market, that how we can create network effects, and how we can you could say exchange value, tap into this value pool that we're creating, be a conduit, a pathway to China for basically, anybody that wants to do decentralized commerce. So that's our ultimate goal, is to actually facilitate cross-border commerce. But the way we think that we're going to end up doing that is actually creating a value pool that's going to be open for anybody globally to tap into.
Yeah, I want to touch on the East and West discussion, and we'll certainly get to that. We have a couple questions laid out in the dashboard, but I'm glad that you brought up this last point about kind of mixing the token model or I guess the people that are using the token publicly, as well as trying to find the private enterprises that are using the blockchain. And me and the guys at Layer One and Parada, we're always talking about kind of the duality in that, in a sense, right? Because you have this public token that you're trying to maybe push, or this public network that you're trying to push to the public, and also announcing that you're working on private blockchains with different governments. Is like, how do those work together? Sometimes it's kind of a meme to us where there's some public blockchains that announce partnerships, and we don't really understand how those two connect. So I'd love for you to break that down a little bit further, as well as kind of breaking down the token economic model for the users and investors of Conflux.
Sure. So let me first explain, the sort of the blockchain landscape in China, right? But by now everybody's heard of this really ambitious national blockchain strategy. And I think everybody's impression of this is that it's this very sort of highly centralized and very controlled, right? Very centrally sort of controlled. But in fact, the way this sort of initiative works is funding is dispersed to provinces, to states, and states essentially make those strategic decisions as to where they want the funding to go and what projects. And so what you see in the news these days is actually reflective of this strategy. So a few years ago, you would hear about NEO and Ontology, and now you don't really hear too much about those projects. It's very difficult for a public network to kind of operate in China, right? But what you hear about now are DCEP, right? The Digital Yuan project, or BCN, this sort of enterprise blockchain network that they're trying to launch out, or you hear about Tencent and Alibaba running some sort of like consortia chain, right? So all of these things are actually there's two things to kind of point out, and they're fairly obvious. One is projects that are that, let's say, the old guard, ICO based, that did their fundraise in a non-compliant manner, that have been sort of a part of the speculative market, are very frowned upon. And I would say business is probably not as easy to come by. Okay. And the number two thing is that a lot of these projects that are sort of propping up and what we hear in China, I think we are all sort of looking for the project. Like, what is that project in China? Like, this is the thing, right? Like, what is that Ethereum of? But in fact, these are all private. These are all, for the most part, private or permissioned blockchains. They're not public networks. And as a result of these two things, what you have is a highly fragmented blockchain landscape with different regions, different areas, sort of states sponsoring particular blockchain initiatives, and they all tend to be private and or permissioned blockchain projects. So in our case, I mean, we have that luxury, and we have this sort of great responsibility of kind of being the leaders, being the sort of examples of why, how and why public networks are valuable. And so that should give you kind of a breakdown of the landscape and where we fit in. So we're very unique in the sense that, again, regulatory compliant, great relationships, can basically do business freely, and we are uniquely an open public network, and we plan on kind of paving the way in showing that market how they could utilize the benefits of a public network. So that's the first part. Now, the second part, you're going to actually have to tell me what the second question was.
So I guess the question kind of surrounded the meme of public networks kind of announcing that they're partnering with some big enterprise, right? Like how as a user does my network benefit, or my token benefit from a partnership with IBM? Yeah, it sounds great, but how as a user myself, other than possibly token appreciation, how does that all kind of work together synergistically, kind of the public side as well as the private side? So just from, I guess it's a token economics and mechanics question.
Yeah, I look at it as a macro question, right? I think we all want to get to a point where there's where the end user is benefiting from this technology, right? And when we say real user, we mean, like a consumer. We're talking about adoption. I think for those things, I mean, the short answer is that I think I'm not entirely sure that you can go to market targeting real users right away. I do think that you need to find you need to create, I would say, two out of these three things. One is you need to either find your government use cases, or you need to, number two, or you need to find enterprise partners. And number three, you need to create a community, right? You need to create a community, a vibrant community. If you look at Ethereum, I mean, it's just masterful, right? I mean, their community is effectively a moat. But that community is going to create and generate like innovations that are going to create new opportunities, right? But I don't think the opportunities with all three of these groups right here, right now, I think it's very difficult to go straight to get that sort of mainstream user. I think the user experiences are lacking. I think there's regulatory headwind, and I just think that there's just we just have some of it is just a matter of timing and generational timing. Like we've now had 10 years of Bitcoin and blockchain. So we have a generation growing up with crypto, and we have a generation that prefers investing in Bitcoin than a lot of other equity-based investments. I think that bodes really well. I also think that if we really want this like sort of mainstream adoption, probably the most likely way this is going to happen is going to be through CBDCs. So digital currency, right? Just nationally administered digital currency. That will bring legitimacy, and I think that will start to open up people's eyes to that while it isn't cryptocurrency, that there's some characteristics, and even some of that conflation was actually probably beneficial for us. The second is something like Libra, where Facebook will have access to 2 billion users, and then they're going to be able to kind of get familiar with a digital currency and use it in whether it's payments or whether they move to other things. that familiarity will be really beneficial. The only other thing that I could think of, which is the tough challenge, is that the only other thing that I could see where I don't want to use the word mass adoption, where adoption, or you could get maybe some mainstream adoption, is if you build something that has a truly great user experience, where you get that Web 2 effect, where, where people have spent like years and years sort of giving their data away for free, right? Because they just got to try this platform, or they just got to try this app. If you have some sort of killer user experience, I don't know what that might be, but if you get people sort of, and it's not, I don't think it's impossible. Consumers are irrational, right? It is an irrational sort of marketplace, right? And so if you develop something with that type of user experience, I could see a lot of people just like not even thinking, going through all the hoops and getting some crypto and then just like using a certain platform. So, maybe they need to put crypto on Tinder or something.
Sounds like the next hottest project to be funded, across the globe for sure. They're not a bad idea. But I mean, really, what I think you're getting at on a more serious note is kind of this lack of a really clear use case for your everyday user. I mean, if you think about how long it's taken to kind of teleport people from cash and using the banking system now to just exploring some other more, kind of less bank oriented setup like a PayPal or a Square Cash, which admittedly is still very far from the concept of using Bitcoin or cryptocurrency or even digital dollars. It's at least a step forward. So all these various, kind of thought about narratives around dApps and maybe security tokens are some protocol, some protocols kind of main focus. There really hasn't been a clear winner that anyone can point to and say, hey, this is going to be the next use case for your everyday user. So totally understand that, right?
I would. Sorry. One thing I would say is that, because I was just thinking while you're talking there, that I do think that, if we're looking at what is that use case that could be very compelling, I think, and I think Vitalik talked about it like a few weeks ago when he was talking about yields and this focus on yields and DeFi in general. I think there is this world, I mean, we need to look beyond DeFi actually. And there is this world of just creative works, art, music, that all of that stuff. That's where, and if maybe NFTs or this world of NFTs, but, if you think about what blockchains are, right? I mean, it's fundamentally, with the internet, like when I send you something, I don't send you something where you have it and I don't, right? I send you a copy. Blockchains facilitate that. I think this ability to create almost like a new luxury market, around creative works, I think that's the type of like super like human-centered, emotional product that could like deliver that type of use case where people just got to have it and they got to have crypto to use it, or they'll just do whatever it takes.
Yeah, for sure. I would definitely agree that NFTs or digital collectibles, I mean, even art on the blockchain, right, I think is probably the closest to this mainstream use case. It makes a ton of sense. I think it's going to be something that's viable and valuable to the next generation, like you were talking about. Talking a little bit more about the China piece, right? You brought up kind of some interesting concepts about how the market is so fragmented. And one of the constant topics that comes out of China is kind of this regulatory ban hammer that one week it's, hey, China's banning Bitcoin mining, and the next month now it's banning cryptocurrency exchanges, right? And there seems to be really some broad-based misunderstanding in the West with the way that government regulations work in China at the local level and kind of more the state level. So, real specifically to cryptocurrency exchanges over there, I would say over the last 6 to 12 months, we started to hear about kind of the larger Chinese-based exchanges, namely OKX and Huobi, who were kind of in the approved basket, right, with the Chinese government. And then, the majority of the smaller exchanges were maybe not necessarily kind of okayed by the government there. Is this what you're seeing, or is that kind of a myth that we hear over here where the government is kind of naming or specifying, hey, these companies are okay, you guys are quote unquote regulatory approved, but everybody else, if you're not on this list, kind of move over to the side?
So I think the conversations that we've had, I think that the government is trying to understand the market. They're taking their time to try to figure out. They don't want to make any mistakes either and kill some huge opportunities, huge industries of tomorrow, right? So, so I think it's a matter of sort of bringing of those decision makers sort of taking their time and getting up to speed while being concerned about the speculative market, because it is a highly speculative market in China. And so I think I couldn't comment for sure, but from what we can see, that's the conflict, right? That's the conflict that exists. And so, again, lucky for us, we get to, be a part of that conversation and helping mold like what the blockchain landscape is going to look like in the future. And, as academics, we're fairly market neutral. What we really want is we want to build a great infrastructure that the world can use, not just China. But equally, we would love to for the China market and the government and the regulators to learn as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, and hopefully through our proof points of working with them, that public networks are the way to go.
Yeah, in my pre-episode research, I was super excited to get your intake or your takes, I guess, on the East meets West connection and vice versa. It reminds me of the conversations I have with DAOs, which I do feel like DAOs are another use case that could be bringing in other adoption cases. But it reminded me of a conversation I had with someone in that space where they said DAOs don't solve the community, right? Like the tech's there, but you don't get a community just by kind of building a DAO. And in the same way, I want to talk to you about this East meets West connection, because it seems like just from like an anthropological kind of perspective, cultures are set up in different ways. That's very factual, right? So slapping a blockchain and saying East meets West, it doesn't seem like that necessarily can solve a lot of the problems that you have between people in Web2 environments between China and in the US per se, if I'm using two examples. So I really want to get this idea of what you think, just being in that middle of that East meets West connection. How do you think blockchain kind of can solve these issues? There's issues like language, there's a ton of different cultural perspectives that kind of stand in the way, and maybe some people would even say that blockchain can't solve this, right? Like this is always going to be kind of a line in the sand between East and West.
Yeah, I love that question. So, to be clear, what we're trying to do with this network is create cross-border commerce, right? And actually what we're trying to do, maybe more specifically, is create what we call liquid markets. So how do assets and data flow freely across blockchains, from centralized to decentralized systems, across jurisdictions, and all hopefully in a regulatory compliant way, right? And so that's a big challenge. So, there's a lot of levels to this question. One is, what are the sort of day-to-day, like, what are the needs of a network? Of the services that somebody could build on this type of network? What are the sort of the geographic needs that are going to make this network useful and valuable, right? And so if you think of like emerging markets, I mean, you've heard Jack Dorsey talk about like the future of cryptocurrencies in Africa, right? And so we really believe that is true. That Africa is very fertile field for cryptocurrency and decentralized financial services. There's just you have these societies that have unstable economies and marginalized groups, and so we have some team members in Africa. We're starting to sort of build an Africa strategy that's sort of revolved around building DeFi solutions that are going to be sort of, let's say, more human-centered, like more usable, as we talked about real users previously. When it comes to building developer communities, I see, geographic, cultural differences. Again, over here, there's this hacker community, right? And we really believe strongly in this. It's somewhat ideological that like these communities are going to be very organic. They're going to be sort of self-organizing. They're going to govern themselves. There's going to be these sort of intrinsic contributions, right? And in China, developer communities don't look like that, right? If you were building developer archetypes, they look different than they are in the West, right? They're more pragmatic. They're not ideological. They are, it's a different archetype. And so to go there and think that there's like a sort of embedded ruling sort of hacker culture, it's not quite the way that it looks out here. And so there's a different, you kind of almost have to create like a developer community with different assumptions, including working with some top-down initiatives. Mm-hmm. It's a highly pragmatic society. You have developers there that are making as much as developers in Silicon Valley, and yet in some places the cost of living is not as high. So for them to spend their time on playing around with technology and hacking, that culture, I mean, this is a sort of a generation of like new money, let's put it that way. And you don't have the same levels of intrinsic motivation. I think you have to, or maybe I should rephrase that, you have to tap into different types of intrinsic motivation, right? So that's another, I think, sort of key distinction. And then beyond that, like there is this air of like US, China, like trade war, right? But I think, our goal, and luckily we've been talking to a lot of great partners, both institutional and otherwise, in the US, in Europe, that they're not really interested in sort of like this sort of geopolitical kind of like economic warfare, that have the same mindset as us and are very receptive to sort of how are we going to build this free flow of assets, this this open commerce network. How are we going to do that? And then obviously stable coins are a big part of those conversations, right? Like now stable coins are at $10 billion. They've doubled in the last 6 months. Stable coins, we think, are going to have a lot of different use cases. I think they're really important for the crypto ecosystem and as a store of value, as a potential medium of exchange. And so we are, I would say our project is probably pretty unique in that we are probably over time having to become a lot more human-centered in how we're figuring out how to build this network. And at the same time, really espouse to like some really espouse to our core values of being collaborative, of being empowering, of being global, connected. So I think this is the exciting part of the work, and actually professionally one of the big reasons why I came to Conflux. there's a lot of traditional VCs that were previously entrepreneurs, but in the crypto space, there haven't been a lot of crypto investors that have actually worked at on crypto network projects. And so for me, this is a kind of a unique challenge, something that I think is going to over my career is going to help me quite a bit. And I'm really fascinated with how we're going to tackle these problems. And I'm pretty confident we're going to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm really envious of you guys that kind of are at the intersection between China and the U.S. or the West in general, as it comes to like a professional level as well as user investor level. I'm really envious of you guys. So just one more question, since I have you here and I have your knowledge about all things East West. I feel like the question that's often thrown at you is, well, what don't we know about the East, right? Like what you've been over in Hong Kong, you've been in Beijing, you have all this knowledge of maybe Chinese markets, but I kind of want to twist that around a little bit. What don't maybe Eastern investors or Eastern users or just Eastern citizens, like in China, what don't they know about us, right? Like what don't they understand about the West that you have to kind of break down for them on a consistent basis? Or do they just know everything? They know everything about us. We're easy to understand over here.
I don't know if it's a matter of not knowing. I think in fact, like if anything, I find that there's a hyper awareness of there's a different investment outlook, a different sort of investment philosophy when it comes to crypto. That you look at investors, guys I look up to, at Multicoin, Placeholder, a lot of their investment decisions are actually like somewhat ideological, right? And like what the world should look like, what we want it to look like, right? Right. And what you have in China are investors that are like very, very pragmatic. They're just like, they're not ideological. They just like, how is this going to make money? Or how is this going to work? Like, what is the value here? I don't think it's a matter of being short-termists, but they're looking at it from very much of a business standpoint, as opposed to how do we build the future or a better future. And I don't think that mindset of the business mindset is excluding a better future. I think that they genuinely believe that if we're building good businesses, we're building a better future. But I think that it's just far less ideological. And if anything, they probably, what I find, this is the one thing that what maybe it's a more a matter of, instead of what don't they know about us, but more a matter of like self-awareness. I think when I worked in Europe for many years, and then now I'm working and spending a lot of time in China. And so one of the things that I think people admire greatly and underestimate are maybe not fully self-aware of there is a tremendous American can-do spirit and ingenuity and imagination and risk-taking. And in Europe, I remember working there for 5 years. This was a question Europeans would ask all the time, like, how can we become more risk-taking? How can we be more sort of forward-thinking, imaginative? And I think the further east you go, the more of a challenge it is for them to take risks and be imaginative. And they wonder how Americans, with that Silicon Valley tradition, how they do it. Right?
I'm playing the Star Spangled Banner in the background when this video goes live.
Well, trust me, I don't like saying it. I'm Canadian, right? but look, in all honesty, we have the same problem here in Canada, right? Like, we are not risk takers. And so, I have spent, I worked in San Francisco for 3 years. I would say that there's tremendous learning being in San Francisco and New York. And, there's plenty to learn from everybody, but for sure, like, other markets in general are wondering how they can be more innovative, and that there's a secret sauce. So it's a shame that the SEC is sort of not letting us use this imagination to bring this space forward, because I think there's going to be, tremendous, not just like economic benefits, but much more importantly, like social benefits that come out of this.
Yeah, that's fascinating insight. Very much appreciated on that front. It's not often that we get that direct insight on the way that the East versus West culture kind of interacts, and I think those differences definitely make sense. So much appreciated there. I know everybody out there has got a lot to chew on that front. Now, before we hop off here, we've had you here for a little over an hour now. You mentioned the mainnet for Conflux is going live in September. Are there any other major milestones that you all are looking at? And for those developers or enthusiasts who are looking to interact with the token, will they be able to do that at mainnet? Is there something they can do now to join the community?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of, I would say, big milestones that the community should be aware of. So firstly, we're going to be at mainnet in September. We're going to be super happy about that. We're in the middle of our mainnet launch plan, and we're going to be launching our mining and the decentralization of our mining and our new POW algorithm in the next few weeks as well. And this is what developers should know about this project is that this is a network that will have virtually no network congestion. The fees will be less than 1% of Ethereum, and it's Solidity compatible. And we're building this infrastructure so that it's going to be part of the connected crypto space, meaning that we've built a cross-chain protocol where assets can flow freely across other blockchains and Conflux. So this is a very, very developer-friendly network to use. There's going to be a lot of benefits, both that are on the network in terms of fees and economics, but then there's a lot of other benefits that we are, you could say off-chain, that we're creating through our community, through our network, and through other programs, including our incubation center, our R&D center. So there's a lot happening, and I think this is something like all developers should actually, I think examine. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities to build like some great stuff on here, including those in the DeFi space.
Yeah, I can't wait to have you guys back on in like 6 months' time, maybe talk about everything you guys have been developing and mainnet going live and all these things and how it's all being worked out. But this has been an amazing discussion, Eden. I do have one last question here. We like to get a book recommendation to the viewers and listeners out there. So any book, it could be crypto or non-crypto. What book recommendation do you have?
Well, my book recommendation is probably one I would imagine others have already recommended, but definitely Radical Markets by Glenn Weiss. I think Radical Markets, it is actually personally a motivator for me in the Web3 space, and definitely influencing what we are trying to do with open commerce, cross-border commerce, and how we think of data at Conflux. So Radical Markets would definitely be my book recommendation.
Awesome. Well, you can drop your links now as well. Where can they find you, as well as more about Conflux?
You can also find me on Twitter at Eden Dhaliwal. And you can find Conflux at confluxnetwork.org and our Twitter. You can find us on Twitter, Conflux_network.
Awesome. That's great. Well, this has, again, been a fascinating episode. Really appreciate all the insight you're bringing. And as Q said, we'll certainly have you on here as mainnet launches, and be sure to keep everybody posted. But for now, thanks for the time.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to check out Layer 1 on all the audio and video platforms listed in the description. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next week.